Welcome to the debate. We often picture a narcissist as, loud, arrogant, commanding the room.
Right.
But the most dangerous predators, they don't announce themselves. They hide behind a mask of shyness or anxiety or depression. They don't demand your admiration. They harvest your pity.
Yeah, they really do.
Today, we are looking at a highly destructive, deeply invisible dynamic. Basically, how does a covert narcissist actually operate to gain absolute control? I mean, from a behavioral profiling perspective, I see a methodology built on calculated deception. It is a system where the grandiosity is still completely intact, but it's cloaked.
Mm-hmm.
They use passive aggression and a fabricated ultimate victim persona to just covertly siphon power from their targets.
And, coming from the clinical trauma side, I argue that if we focus entirely on the predator's playbook, we kind of miss the actual crime scene.
Interesting.
Yeah, because the true terror of covert narcissism isn't just the tactical manipulation, right? It's the invisible psychological dismantling of the victim. We are looking at how these subtle drip-feed tactics hijack a human nervous system, systematically destroy the target's perception of reality, and force them into a trauma-bonded state of chronic, paralyzing self-doubt.
Right. And to really understand that dynamic, I think we have to look at why a narcissist would choose the covert route in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because an overt narcissist, the chest-thumping CEO type, they use high social capital to demand compliance. But a covert narcissist often lacks those resources. Or, they just lack the sheer charisma required to sustain that overt grandiosity.
Exactly. So they have to adapt.
Right. So they pivot. They hijack the innate human social contract of caregiving. They realize that playing the victim is, frankly, an incredibly efficient way to evade accountability while still remaining the center of the universe.
It really is a profound inversion of the normal relationship structure. Because in a healthy dynamic, vulnerability invites mutual connection.
Yeah.
But here, vulnerability is a trapdoor.
Precisely. They don't kick the door down to invade your life. They convince you to unlock it yourself because, they're standing in the rain. Wait, look at how they use pity. That's not depression, that's weaponized guilt.
Oh, absolutely.
We see this most clearly in how they initiate a cycle of abuse or pull a target back in, right? They won't aggressively demand your time. They will manufacture a crisis.
Right, a sudden emergency.
Exactly. They suddenly have a mysterious illness, or a sudden financial panic, or just a vague emotional collapse. And they look at a highly empathetic partner and say, I'm in a dark place, and you are literally the only person in the world who understands me. It is a surgical strike on the target's empathy.
Sighs heavily. This is exactly what trips victims up. It is agonizing to witness in clinical practice because the outside world looks at that dynamic and thinks, wow, what a supportive patient partner.
Right. They look like the good guy.
Exactly. But internally, that weaponized guilt is forcing the victim's brain directly into a trauma response. We often talk about fight or flight, but in these relationships, the victim is forced into what trauma researcher Pete Walker calls the fawn response.
Which most people just dismiss as extreme people-pleasing.
Right, and that completely minimizes the biological reality of what is happening. Fawning is not a personality flaw. It is a mammalian survival mechanism.
Wow.
Yeah. When you are tethered to a partner who is constantly spiraling, constantly in crisis, or constantly threatening subtle self-destruction, your autonomic nervous system learns that the only way to establish safety is to completely appease the threat.
So they just surrender?
Basically, yes. The victim learns to preemptively scan the room, read the micro-expressions of the abuser, and abandon their own physical and emotional boundaries just to keep the abuser stable. And the true tragedy? The victim mistakes their own physiological panic response for profound love and loyalty.
I understand the clinical framing of the fawn response, but I really want to challenge the idea that this is just an accidental tragic loop.
Okay, how so?
Well, from a profiling standpoint, this looks much more like a parasitic feeding mechanism. The narcissist didn't just stumble upon a partner who fawns, right? They ran a highly specific selection process.
You think it's that calculated?
Absolutely. They don't target weak, easily subjugated people. They actively scan for individuals with a high capacity for compassion, people who have a propensity to take on the emotional labor of a room. The covert narcissist identifies that empathy as an exploitable resource. They are mining it to sustain an ego that is too fragile to sustain itself.
I don't disagree that there is a selection process, but when you describe it simply as mining empathy, it almost sounds too clean.
Too clean.
Yeah, because neurologically, it is a hostage situation. When a victim is trapped in chronic fawning, they are aggressively suppressing their own fight-or-flight instincts. Every time the narcissist crosses a boundary and the victim swallows their anger to keep the peace, they are forcing their own nervous system to stand down.
Right, so there's a physical toll.
A massive one. Over months and years, that chronic suppression drains their cognitive bandwidth. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for complex decision-making and a sense of self, it literally begins to dial down. The victim loses the ability to know what they even want or feel because 100% of their biological resources are dedicated to managing the abuser's fabricated reality.
And that exhaustion, I'd argue, is exactly what the abuser counts on. Because eventually, the victim will inevitably slip. They will get too tired to fawn perfectly, or they will subtly try to assert a boundary.
Which never goes well.
No, it doesn't. And how does the covert narcissist respond to that perceived slight? They don't explode with rage like an overt narcissist. They deploy narcissistic withdrawal.
The silent treatment.
Exactly, the silent treatment. They will become a stone wall for days, sometimes weeks. And they dress it up in the language of vulnerability, like, I'm just so hurt by you, I need space to heal.
Yeah.
It is brilliant in its malice because it frames a calculated, punitive measure as emotional fragility. It isolates the target and forces them to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness for an argument they didn't even start.
But looking at the silent treatment merely as a behavioral tactic entirely ignores the chemical warfare happening inside the victim's body.
Chemical warfare?
Yes, the sudden withdrawal of attachment doesn't just make the victim sad, it floods their system with cortisol. They experience genuine physiological panic. Their heart races, they suffer from insomnia, they feel a sense of impending doom. The abuser is effectively starving the victim's nervous system of baseline safety.
But framing it heavily around the victim's cortisol and brain chemistry risks removing the agency of the abuser, doesn't it?
No, I don't think so.
Well, calling it a biological trap makes it sound like an organic disease rather than a game where the narcissist is meticulously calibrating the dosage of pain.
Oh, I am absolutely not removing their agency. I am highlighting the sheer devastation of what their calibration achieves. Because the moment the narcissist decides the target has been punished enough, they return.
Right.
But they don't just return to baseline. They return with a crumb of affection, a brief window of intense warmth, or what we call love bombing. And when that happens, the victim's brain, which has been starving in a cortisol drought, receives a massive, overwhelming rush of dopamine and oxytocin.
Oh, wow. So the cessation of the abuse becomes the ultimate reward.
Exactly. It operates on a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. This is the exact same neurological mechanism that makes a slot machine so dangerously addictive. The extreme inconsistency, the intermittent reinforcement, it bonds the victim to the abuser at a cellular level.
That is terrifying.
It is. The victim isn't staying because they are weak-willed, They are staying because their neural pathways have been rewired to associate this person with literal survival. When they try to leave, their brain experiences genuine substance-like withdrawal. The abuser hasn't just manipulated their mind. They have engineered a biological dependency.
I see the power of that biological dependency, definitely. But the narcissist doesn't rely on intermittent reinforcement alone. They have to actively erode the victim's baseline confidence, so they never realize they have the strength to walk away.
Right, the daily grind of it.
Exactly. This brings us to the day-to-day maintenance of this dynamic. Micro-insults and covert gaslighting. The overt narcissist will yell, "You are stupid." The covert narcissist uses plausible deniability. They engage in passive aggression masked as humor or observation. Let's look at the classic dinner party scenario from the source material, right? The covert narcissist is holding court, laughs affectionately, pats their partner's shoulder, and says to the groom, "Oh, honey, you are always so clumsy. You just can't help yourself, can you?"
Which forces everyone else at the table to smile because it sounds like endearing banter.
That is the genius of it. To the audience, it's a slightly teasing, loving partner. But to the victim, it is a precision strike. If the victim reacts with anger in that moment, they look unhinged and unstable to their friends.
Yeah.
And if they wait and complain about it in the car ride home, the narcissist simply says, "You are way too sensitive. It was clearly a joke. Why are you always trying to start a fight?" It grants the abuser absolute deniability while establishing complete dominance over the target's self-esteem.
And the cumulative effect of those precision strikes is what shatters the victim's reality. When you are subjected to thousands of those micro-insults, the brain stops filtering them out.
You just accept it.
You internalize that critical voice. Your internal compass, the mechanism that tells you what is true, what is acceptable, and what your own worth is, it shatters completely. But the gaslighting gets significantly darker when the covert narcissist shifts from subtle insults to weaponized concern.
Yes. Framing themselves as the worried caregiver.
Yes, and it is a uniquely chilling form of psychological abuse. Instead of putting the victim down, they feign deep worry. With a perfectly calm, soothing tone, they will say, "I'm really worried about your paranoia lately." Or, "Your memory is getting so bad, maybe we should look into getting you some help."
Which just completely destabilizes them.
Completely. Because the victim is already off balance, already swimming in cortisol from the intermittent reinforcement, so they don't fight back. They actually start to believe it. They start questioning their own basic cognitive functions. Am I paranoid? Did I imagine that insult? Am I losing my mind?
Yeah.
The end result is a victim who constantly apologizes for transgressions they never committed, surrendering their entire perception of reality to the exact person who is actively destroying it.
And that complete surrender of reality is exactly the fertile ground they need for their ultimate defense mechanism.
Yes.
Because eventually, the victim's exhaustion will peak and they will gather the courage to confront the abuser with undeniable proof, a discovered lie, an infidelity, maybe a hidden financial drain. And the moment they do, the covert narcissist deploys DARVO, deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender.
A classic maneuver.
As a profiler, DARVO is a masterclass in tactical evasion.
Because it entirely derails the search for truth.
It is essentially a psychological squid ink. It's not just deployed to hide the narcissist. It is designed to completely blind and disorient the predator, or in this case, the truth seeker. The mechanics are cold and robotic. First, they look at the hard evidence and flatly, convincingly deny it ever happened.
Right.
Second, they instantly attack the credibility of the victim. "You went through my phone, you are violating my privacy, you are insane."
Shifting the spotlight off their own actions.
Exactly. But the final step, the reversal, is where the covert nature truly shines. Suddenly, the entire conversation pivots. It is no longer about the narcissist's betrayal. It is about how deeply, profoundly wounded the narcissist is by the victim's lack of trust.
Yeah.
They claim the role of the ultimate victim so masterfully that the actual victim who initiated the conversation to seek accountability suddenly finds himself frantically on the defensive. They end up comforting the narcissist, desperately trying to prove they aren't a bad, untrusting partner. The threat is entirely neutralized because the threat has been forced to defend itself.
The devastation that DARVO inflicts on a human brain just cannot be overstated. When this happens, it triggers profound cognitive dissonance. The brain is attempting to hold two mutually exclusive truths at the exact same time.
Which are?
Well, I have empirical proof that this person is destroying me, and this person is crying, telling me they love me, and saying I am the one hurting them. The human brain cannot sustain that contradiction. It short circuits. And when the mind is forced to deny its own reality over and over again, the body absorbs the shock.
You are talking about the physical manifestation of the abuse.
Yes, somatic distress.
The trauma doesn't just stay in the mind, it converts into biological chaos. We are talking about chronic, systemic inflammation.
Wow, really?
Oh, absolutely. Victims present in clinical settings with severe gastrointestinal distress, sudden autoimmune flare-ups, debilitating migraines, and chronic muscle tension. Their vagus nerve is perpetually signaling danger, keeping their nervous system in a state of high alert. The body is literally keeping the score of the abuse that the mind has been gaslit into ignoring.
And the tragedy is, when the victim's body finally starts breaking down and they desperately need a support system, they find that the covert narcissist has already dismantled that too.
Oh yeah.
Because the covert narcissist doesn't just play the victim behind closed doors. They play it to the entire world. This is the calculated, preemptive strike known as the smear campaign.
Which weaponizes that same concern we talked about earlier, just aimed outward.
Precisely. Long before the relationship actually ends, the covert narcissist will quietly go to the victim's friends, family, and coworkers. They don't rant or rave. They use a gentle, pained tone. "I'm so worried about her. She's been so unstable and angry lately. I'm trying my best to support her, but it's getting so hard."
That makes me sick.
It's a masterpiece of preemptive deception. So when the victim finally hits a breaking point and cries out for help, the environment has already been poisoned. The support system looks at the victim's frantic, trauma-induced behavior and thinks, wow, he was right. She really is unstable.
And that is the final turn of the knife. The profound isolation that occurs when a victim realizes that no one believes them is often cited as the most traumatizing aspect of the entire ordeal. The covert narcissist manages to destroy their target in the dark while bathing in the sympathy and admiration of the public square.
It is a perfect cage. When you map the methodology from the initial extraction of pity to the intermittent reinforcement, the plausible deniability of micro-insults, and the ultimate evasion of Darvo, you see a highly evolved predatory system. The grandiosity never disappeared, it just adapted.
Right.
They maintain absolute control, feed their insatiable need for superiority, and ensure their target is entirely subjugated, all without ever leaving a fingerprint.
And while mapping that cage is crucial, the true gravity of this dynamic is only understood by looking at the survivor trapped inside it. This is not just a toxic relationship. It is a targeted, systematic dismantling of a human being's reality.
It really is.
The aftermath isn't a bad breakup. It is complex PTSD. It is a shattered sense of self. Survivors often require years of specialized trauma-informed therapy just to repair their internal compass, to unlearn the physiological fawning response and to realize they were never the unstable monster they were gaslit into believing they were.
Whether viewed through the lens of a calculated predatory strategy or a devastating neurobiological trauma, covert narcissism remains one of the most destructive and insidious forces in human psychology. It relies entirely on remaining unseen.
Which is why naming these tactics is the most powerful thing we can do. When you are lost in the fog of this abuse, you just feel broken. But once you understand the mechanics of Darvo, once you realize how your dopamine has been hijacked by intermittent reinforcement, the illusion cracks.
You see the matrix.
Exactly. You can never unsee the patterns. And that recognition is the foundational step to reclaiming your mind and your reality.
The lens you choose to analyze this through is up to you. But remember, the most dangerous predators don't announce their arrival. They don't demand your admiration. They harvest your pity. Keep exploring the material and stay vigilant to the invisible dynamics in your own life. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.